Something has been banned by 5 different civilizations, declared satanic by at least 3 religious authorities, and accused of causing everything from impotence to revolutionary politics. Rulers had people executed for drinking it. Priests held heresy trials. An Ottoman sultan personally patrolled the streets of his capital at night, in disguise, hunting anyone who dared consume it, and had them beaten on the spot. That something is in your kitchen right now. This is a story about what happens when a substance makes people think differently, and why that has always terrified whoever is in power. Because power, historically, does not like people who are alert, awake, and talking to strangers. The oldest account of coffee's discovery involves Kaldi, a goat herder in the Ethiopian highlands sometime around the 9th century. His goats ate the red berries from a particular tree and refused to sleep. They were dancing, according to the story, by morning. Kaldi brought the berries to a local monastery. The monks, skeptical and probably exhausted, threw them into the fire. As the berries hit the flames, they released an aroma that nobody in that room had ever encountered. Something deep, rich, and completely unfamiliar. The monks pulled the charred berries from the embers, dissolved the remnants in water, drank what they had made, and stayed awake all night. Not because they had to, because they could not stop thinking. Whether Kaldi was real is an open question. The story has survived because it gets the essential truth right. Coffee was discovered by accident, recognized immediately for its power, and the first people to institutionalize it were communities that needed to stay awake longer than the human body normally allows. They found in it not just a stimulant, but a tool for a specific kind of mental work. The documented history begins in Yemen, in the Sufi monasteries around the port city of Mocha, sometime in the 15th century. Sufi mystics used coffee for extended nighttime devotion, a drink that kept practitioners alert enough to pray through the hours when the body normally surrenders. They called it kawa. The word originally meant wine, and that comparison was deliberate. Wine altered consciousness by dulling it, while coffee altered consciousness by sharpening it. The Sufis understood, perhaps better than anyone who came after them, that they were dealing with something that changed the quality of thought, not just the quantity of wakefulness. From the monasteries, coffee moved to the cities of Yemen, and then to Mecca and Medina along the pilgrimage routes. Merchants arriving for the Hajj brought it home. Within a generation, coffee houses had opened across the Arabian Peninsula, and something structurally new had appeared in human social life. A cheap public space where anyone could sit, drink, and talk for hours, without alcohol, without a religious context, without asking anyone's permission. The authorities noticed within years. In 1511, Khair Beg, the governor of Mecca, convened a formal legal council to rule on whether coffee was permissible under Islamic law. His argument was creative in its logic. Coffee altered the mind, therefore it was intoxicating, therefore it was functionally identical to alcohol, therefore it was forbidden. The council agreed. He ordered the coffee houses shuttered, the stocks burned, and anyone caught drinking coffee punished. The ban lasted less than a year. The Sultan of Cairo, Khair Beg's own superior, overruled him, reportedly because the Sultan enjoyed coffee personally. The coffee houses reopened. Khair Beg, having failed to eliminate a beverage, was eventually removed from his position. History does not record whether he connected the two events. This sequence, ban, collapse, reversal, would repeat across cultures and centuries with such consistency that it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a structural feature of how coffee and political authority interact. In the Ottoman Empire, coffee houses spread through the 16th century until Constantinople alone had hundreds of them. Men from entirely different social classes, merchants, janissaries, scholars, craftsmen, poets, sat together in the same room, drank the same cheap drink, and talked about theology, about the price of bread, about the competence of the vizier. Sultan Murad IV, ruling in the 1630s, made the most serious attempt of any Ottoman ruler to eliminate the coffeehouse altogether. He did not merely issue a decree, he closed them by force, declared them centers of sedition, banned coffee alongside tobacco and opium as a package of destabilizing substances, and, this is documented in contemporary accounts, personally walked the streets of Constantinople at night in disguise to catch violators. People found drinking coffee were beaten with clubs. Repeat offenders, according to some accounts, were sewn into leather sacks and dropped into the Bosphorus. Murad died in 1640. Within months, the coffeehouses were open again. The question that Murad's failure raises is worth sitting with. The coffeehouse was not, in the information environment of the 17th century, merely a place where people happened to drink something stimulating. It was the only space in the city where knowledge moved across class lines rather than down through them. Before newspapers, before any mechanism for the lateral circulation of information, the coffeehouse performed a function that nothing else could. A craftsman could learn what a senior bureaucrat knew. A sailor could hear what a merchant was worried about. Opinions formed, circulated, evolved, and sometimes solidified into something that looked like organized dissent. Coffee did not start revolutions. It built the rooms where revolutions became thinkable. The first coffee houses in England opened in the early 1650s, Jacob's in Oxford in 1651, and a handful in London shortly after. By 1700, London alone had more than 2,000 of them, and they had earned a nickname, penny universities. A penny, the price of admission, which covered your first cup, bought you an afternoon in a room with merchants, lawyers, scientists, and writers. The floor was deliberately level. No reserved seats for nobility. You sat where there was space. Charles II issued a royal proclamation in 1675 to close them all. The stated grounds were that coffeehouses had produced very evil and dangerous effects by allowing men of inferior rank to spread false, malicious, and scandalous reports against the government. The response from merchants, the professional classes, and nearly every constituency that mattered commercially was so immediate and so fierce that Charles withdrew the proclamation before it ever took effect. 11 days of notice had been given. 11 days was all it took to establish that the coffeehouses were untouchable. What was happening inside those rooms extended well beyond political gossip, and the consequences stretch into the present in ways that are not immediately visible. Edward Lloyd ran a coffeehouse on Tower Street in London starting around 1686, catering to sailors, merchants, and ship owners. He began posting shipping intelligence on the walls, which vessels had arrived, which were overdue, which had been lost. His establishment became the gathering point for underwriters, men who would accept financial risk on a cargo's safe arrival in exchange for a fee. They sat at specific tables. If a merchant needed to insure a shipment, he came to Tower Street, found the right underwriter, and negotiated the terms over coffee. Lloyd's of London exists today. It insures satellites, offshore oil rigs, and things that would not have been imaginable to Edward Lloyd himself. Its foundation is a coffee house and a man who understood the value of accurate information. Jonathan's Coffee House in Exchange Alley served a similar function for equity trading. Brokers who dealt in shares of the new joint stock companies, the East India Company, the Bank of England, the early insurance syndicates, met there to buy and sell. When Jonathan's eventually formalized, it became the London Stock Exchange. The financial architecture governing trillions of dollars in global capital today was sketched in rooms that smelled like roasted beans and tobacco smoke. The intellectual history of the Enlightenment runs through the same buildings. Newton discussed ideas at coffee houses before publishing them. Voltaire, who reportedly drank 40 cups a day, credited the stimulant for his output, which, across more than 70 volumes, is either a testimonial or a warning. Rousseau developed much of his political philosophy in Parisian cafés. Jonathan Swift used them as his primary intelligence network. The Royal Society of London grew from informal meetings that were partly coffeehouse in character. Taken together, the shift from ale to coffee as Europe's primary daytime beverage probably did something to the continent's cognitive output that historians have still not fully measured. For centuries, working people drank weak ale with their meals, including at midday, because fermentation made water safer than drinking it untreated. Mild intoxication was the standard baseline for a significant portion of the working day. Coffee replaced it with something that sharpened people rather than dulled them, and it did so at exactly the moment when European commerce, science, and political organization were evolving faster than at any previous point in history. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the stories behind things everyone uses and almost nobody thinks about, subscribe. New episodes every few days, and what's coming next will surprise you. The comfortable story about coffee and enlightenment tends to skip past what sustained it. By the 18th century, European demand was outpacing what the Yemeni highlands could supply, and European powers reached for the solution they had applied to spices, silk, cotton, and sugar before: colonize a supply. The Dutch got there first. Yemeni traders had protected their monopoly by exporting only roasted or boiled beans, sterile, incapable of germinating. In 1616, the Dutch merchant Peter van der Broek managed to smuggle live plants out of Mocha. Plantations went up in Java and Ceylon, and within decades, Java had become a synonym for coffee in English that has never left the language. The French story is more dramatic. In 1714, Amsterdam's mayor gave Louis XIV a coffee plant as a diplomatic gift. It went into the Royal Botanical Garden in Paris. 9 years later, Gabriel de Clieu, a naval officer convinced that Caribbean coffee plantations would be enormously profitable, obtained a cutting from the royal plant by methods historical accounts describe as either charming or unauthorized, depending on the source. He transported the cutting to Martinique on a voyage that reportedly involved an assassination attempt, a severe storm, and a Dutch naval attack. During a stretch of becalmed seas, de Clieu rationed his own drinking water to keep the plant alive. The cutting reached Martinique alive. It took root. It spread. By some estimates, 90% of all coffee plants now growing in Latin America trace their lineage to that single specimen from a Paris greenhouse. The plantations built on this botanical theft ran on enslaved labor, the same system that had powered sugar cultivation in the same territories. Before its revolution in 1791, Haiti was producing more than half the world's coffee supply. When the revolution ended, French colonial control of the island, Brazil absorbed the demand. Over the 19th century, Brazil became the world's dominant producer, a position it has never relinquished. Coffee accounted at its peak for 70% of Brazil's total export revenue. The railways of São Paulo, the port infrastructure, the early industrialization of the Southeast, all of it was underwritten by coffee money. Brazil maintained slavery until 1888, the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish it. The Parisian cafés, where Rousseau articulated his ideas about natural liberty, were sustained, at one remove, by a supply chain built on the complete denial of liberty to the people growing the beans. That contradiction was not resolved in 1888. It was restructured. Until 1773, the American colonies drank tea. They were British subjects, and tea was what British subjects drank. A single political act changed that permanently. The Boston Tea Party, 342 chests of East India Company tea thrown into Boston Harbor in December of that year, turned coffee consumption from a personal preference into a patriotic position. Drinking tea became an act of loyalism almost overnight. Drinking coffee became an act of resistance. By the time that political charge faded, the habit had already taken hold, and habit is almost impossible to reverse. The Civil War set it in physiological concrete. Both Union and Confederate armies received coffee as a standard ration. Union soldiers were allocated roughly 36 pounds of coffee per 100 men per month, more than their allocation of salt. Soldiers wrote about coffee in their diaries and letters home more than almost any other subject. Officers reported that it reduced desertion during night marches, kept sentries functional, and maintained morale through conditions that would otherwise have broken it. The men who came home from 4 years of that brought the need with them. The American coffee habit was not built by advertising. It was built by war. The modern coffee industry has a specific origin point, 1864, when Jabez Burns built the first continuous process commercial roaster. Before Burns, coffee was roasted in small batches, at home or in local shops, slow, inconsistent, and labor-intensive. After Burns, you could roast at industrial scale and ship the result anywhere in the country. The conditions for branding were in place. Folgers was established in San Francisco during the Gold Rush. Maxwell House took its name from the Nashville hotel where Theodore Roosevelt supposedly pronounced it, "good to the last drop." These companies did not invent a new product. They created a new relationship between consumer and product. You bought a name, expected consistency, and the entire process that produced your cup was invisible to you. That invisibility turned out to be enormously commercially valuable. Instant coffee arrived in functional form around 1910 and was rapidly adopted by the military during the First World War. American soldiers spent years in Europe drinking coffee that required nothing but hot water. By the time they came home, they had been habituated to a cup that was convenient, cheap, and, by most measures, terrible, but reliably, predictably terrible, which turned out to be good enough for decades. Then, in 1971, 3 men opened a small shop in Pike Place Market in Seattle, named it after a character in Moby Dick, and sold whole bean coffee only. No cups, no drinks, just the raw material for someone willing to do the rest at home. The founding premise was that Maxwell House and Instant Powder had trained a generation to accept bad coffee as normal, and a market existed for something different. What Starbucks eventually became, a global chain serving drinks with Italian names no Italian would recognize, containing more sugar than most desserts, is a fair target for criticism. But what it also did, across the 1980s and 1990s, was produce the first mass-market consumer base that thought about coffee as something worth caring about. That audience created the conditions for what followed, the specialty coffee movement, with its obsessive attention to single-origin beans, fermentation methods, processing styles, and elevation profiles. The attention wine had received for centuries transferred to coffee. Today, a pound of premium Ethiopian Yirgacheffe can retail for $40 or $50 in an American specialty shop. Coffee from the country where the plant probably originated, sold back to wealthy Western consumers at prices that are inconceivable to the farmers who grew it. The global coffee market is worth approximately $500 billion per year. Starbucks alone generates over $35 billion in annual revenue. The specialty segment is growing at roughly 10% annually. The farmer who grew the beans in your morning cup received, on average, somewhere between 1% and 3% of the retail price of that drink. Coffee grows almost entirely within the tropics, in countries significantly poorer than those that consume it. Ethiopia, Colombia, Vietnam, Guatemala. These are the producers. The roasting, branding, retail infrastructure, and margin capture all happen in wealthy countries that grow nothing. This arrangement has a structural cause. Most coffee-producing nations export raw, unroasted beans, partly because wealthy countries levy tariffs specifically calibrated to discourage imports of finished goods. Raw Ethiopian coffee enters American or European markets with minimal duty. Processed, roasted, branded Ethiopian coffee faces significant barriers. The system rewards exporting raw materials and penalizes attempts to capture more value domestically, which means the colonial-era pattern of resource extraction has been preserved, with cosmetic adjustments into the present. A farmer in the Ethiopian highlands growing the variety that retails at $50 a pound in Brooklyn might receive 50 cents a pound for their harvest. The remaining 49.50 passes through exporters, importers, freight logistics, roasters, and retailers. The length of that chain is not incidental. It is the mechanism by which the gap is maintained. Arabica coffee, the variety that produces most of the world's specialty coffee, is among the most climate-sensitive agricultural crops in commercial production. It grows within a narrow temperature band, at specific elevations, with particular rainfall patterns. Minor deviations affect flavor. Larger ones make a growing region unsuitable. Research published in peer-reviewed journals projects that up to 50% of current Arabica-growing land could become unusable by 2050 under current warming trajectories. Colombian farmers are already moving crops to higher elevations than they planted 20 years ago. Ethiopian farmers describe rainfall patterns their parents did not recognize. In some regions, the coffee cherry is ripening faster than it should, compressing the harvest window and degrading the flavor complexity that makes the coffee worth premium prices. These are not projections. They are current reports from people in the fields. The carbon emissions driving this change come overwhelmingly from industrialized nations, the same nations that consume most of the world's coffee. The countries growing it produce a fraction of those emissions. They are absorbing consequences they did not create, on behalf of an industry whose most visible beneficiaries live elsewhere. The thing that may ultimately constrain your ability to drink good coffee in 25 years is the temperature of the atmosphere, which the people growing your coffee have almost no power to influence. 5 civilizations tried to eliminate coffee. Every single one backed down. The simple explanation, caffeine addiction makes enforcement difficult, is insufficient. Alcohol is also addictive, and bans on alcohol have sometimes held. Saudi Arabia has maintained prohibition on alcohol since 1952. Prohibition in the United States ran for 13 years. Nobody has come close to enforcing a 13-year ban on coffee anywhere, ever. The harder explanation is that coffee had integrated itself into productive life in a way alcohol never had. Banning alcohol from a city left its economy intact, might even have improved it, since alcohol impairs exactly the kind of sustained concentration that commerce requires. Banning coffee meant shutting down the rooms where commerce was conducted, where contracts were negotiated, where information moved. The Ottoman coffeehouse was not a luxury that could be sacrificed. It was the city's information network. Charles II discovered this in 11 days. Once a substance becomes infrastructure rather than entertainment, the calculus of banning it changes permanently. That logic has only deepened. Coffee is now consumed by roughly 2 billion people and sits as the second most traded commodity on the planet, behind oil. The morning productivity of more humans depends on it than on any other single substance. Removing it from the global economy would be a disruption of a different order of magnitude than removing any other agricultural product. A 15th century Sufi monk in a Yemeni monastery, staying awake to pray through the night, could not have imagined any of this. He had a ceramic cup, some roasted berries dissolving in hot water, and a desire to remain conscious long enough to reach God. The chain running from that cup to the Lloyd's of London insurance market, to the Brazilian rainforest, to the Ethiopian farmer earning 50 cents a pound, to the sealed paper cup cooling in your hand right now, that chain is one of the stranger sequences that history has produced. No one planned it, no one could have. It is the accumulated consequence of 10,000 small decisions, each of which seemed obvious at the time. The drink that 5 empires declared an enemy is now the fuel of civilization. We don't build temples to it, we build drive-thrus. And every morning, without really thinking about it, a significant portion of the human race participates in a ritual that began in a monastery and accidentally built the world they live in.